today? Well, it's one of those special tastings before Christmas. Here's my pick of 4 whiskies for Christmas. Yes, thank you very much to Alexandra Gerolami, who sent me these 2, and my dear friend DJ Johnny Hunter, who sent me these 2 from Ian McLeod up in Scotland. Where should we start? We'll start here. This is Glengoyne 12-year-old. Yes, it's a malt whiskey, that's correct. Glengoyne, beautifully, elegantly dressed, always, I think, to my knowledge, always has an age descriptor on it. And of course, in whiskey terms, if it says it's 10 years old, everything in it has to be older than 10. And it's interesting because it says Highland on the front. This is a Highland whiskey. For those people that know their whiskey geography, it's actually about 10 miles north of Glasgow. So it's right on the cusp of lowland. And because it's on the cusp of lowland, and the waters that run past it run into Loch Lomond, a very large body of water, giant lake. But this is not typical Highland whiskey in some ways, and in other ways very, very typical. It has the complexity and elegance of Highland whiskey. Maybe some, well, it depends. You can't, Highland whiskey is such a large area. Let's not dwell on it too much because there's lots of different styles. So let's just describe why this particular whiskey is special. Number 1, there's no peat. Glengoyne is the only Scottish malt whiskey distillery that doesn't have peat, doesn't smoke its barley with peat, doesn't use peat to heat its kilns or its kettles or anything. It's peat free, and for that reason it does stand out. But also, when you think about whiskey from Scotland, little nuances of peat, little bits of peat, are kind of the reason why a lot of us buy Scotch. It adds a layer of complexity. So are we saying that Glengoyne is less complex because it doesn't have the peat layer? Au contraire, because they go to such extraordinary lengths to build complexity in other ways. And also, when I think about it, I do like the odd smoky whiskey, and we'll come on to that in a minute. They cater for that trust. Don't you worry about that. In a minute, you'll see that. But if I think about some of the whiskies that have blown my mind, some great American whiskies, there's one here, absolutely incredible whiskey here. But also, when I think about whiskies like Cavalan from Vietnam, an extraordinary whiskey. No peat there, but tropical bonfires, tropical explosions of flavour, and just the most extraordinary whiskies, forthright and beautifully chamfered together. Glengoyne, I think, starts at a 10-year-old. There's a 10-year-old, there's a 12-year-old, there's a 15-year-old, there's a 21-year-old, there's probably some aged stuff after that. And 2 things are very important to mention about this. Number 1, as far as I understand it, they specify the use of only one type of barley in their production. I read this, or I saw this on the internet at some point, and it may be true, it may not be true. Maybe Johnny can confirm this. But they only use Golden Promise. They don't use the easy barleys like Camargue. They use Golden Promise, which is a extremely special barley in the beer scene. It's the finest probably beer barley you can use, and it's difficult to ferment, so it takes a long time to ferment, but you end up with incredible amounts of flavour. Then Glengoyne distills its whiskey slower than anyone. It's just a trickle through the safe. It's just a dribble of whiskey, and they take longer to distill their very long fermented mash than any other malt whiskey. And that then also adds layers and layers upon layers of complex extra amino acids and stuff in the drink. So you end up with flavours which really you don't find in other whiskies either. So it does stand out, not only because it doesn't have the peat, but there's something in there that replaces it. Also, they are very, very special about their own wood and oak regime. I believe they only use new wood, or wood that hasn't been used before. They condition and season the wood for 4 to 5 to 6 years. But white oak, I don't think they use bourbon necessarily, but there is a lot of colour in this whiskey. And the colour is completely natural. They don't add caramel. It's just one of their things. They factually don't. But you've got a whiskey here which has some colour, although it's in a pale bottle, so you can see it more than in most. So if we put those things together, we've got a Southern Highland malt. We've got special barley. We've got a slow ferment. We've got a very slow distillate. It's 43%. So these are all things which are compiling to build together a drink which is not only elegant and fruity and has different characteristics from your average Central Highland whiskey, but also there's going to be complexity here. And that's the wonderful thing about it. I think when I first tried Glengoyne, I think Mum had a Glengoyne 17, was there an expression? No, it was an 18 in our pub back in the day, and I wish I'd had those bottles now. 80s bottlings of Glengoyne 18, and she made me drink it. It just blew my mind as a young person learning about drink in my early 20s, or was I in my teens? So enough chit chat. Let's try the whiskey. I've decided not to today dilute any of these whiskies because there's an extreme variation in alcohol strengths here, and I think in this case, in these whiskies, that's such an important part of the story. I thought I'd drink them at neat, at bottled strength. So here we have some lovely colour. It's a 12-year-old. Some people think the 12-year-old is the sweet spot. Some people think the 15-year-old, because its concentration is better. But I think you lose some of the elegance, the nuance you get in the 12-year-old. The 10, Glengoyne with stabilisers. But you really ought to go for the 12. And do you know what? If you buy this now, if you're watching this when this show goes out, and you go to Whiskey Exchange, this stuff is quite rightly 45 quid normally. Not today, it's not. I don't know how long it's going to be on offer, but there's this flash offer. It's 35 quid, 34.95 a bottle. You tell me if you can find a better malt whiskey for £35 today than Glengoyne 12-year-old. You'll be on the internet all night, trust. Okay, so giving it the respect it deserves. There's a lovely smell of Meyer lemon rind, like lemon oil, but not sharp lemon, not a mouthy lemon, something a little bit more orangey than that, almost like a St. Clement's. Meyer lemons have a slightly tropical, more orangey sort of aromatic, and it's definitely there. Then underneath, and I did notice this when I spilled some on my hand the other day. I like doing this with malt whiskies, by the way, because then you can smell the wood, the alcohol evaporates straight away, and you're left with the extract. And this is duck egg custard creme brulee. It's got so much vanilla. It's wonderful, creamy aromas with this merest hint of lemon in the. It's almost like they just put one little peel of lemon into the liquid before you set it. It'll be just like this. There's a vinosity to it, to say, because I come from a wine background, a limpid layering, a fluid motion of flavours. It doesn't sit still. But there are rivers of green cardamom coming through, a hint of nutmeg, definitely. Not cinnamon. But there is a definite backbone of fig and butter-kissed popcorn and vanilla. It's a wonderfully, I mean, for a whiskey that does only peatin, you think, well, is that an aperitivo malt? Is that a malt that you have at lunchtime? This is just such a delicious dessert dram. What can I say? But thank you very much, Johnny, for entering that in. And I think that while you get the chance, please, this is going up, you have to know that this whiskey at 35 quid is the bargain of the Christmas. So thank you very much for that. So that's first whiskey. We're doing well, aren't we? That was whiskey number one. And I'm already grinning from ear to ear. Okay, moving on. Weirdly, we're going now to Ireland. Irish whiskey after a Highland whiskey. How strange. Well, yeah, I didn't really know which order to do these in. There's a guy that people know in the spirits industry called Mark Rainier. He created Bruichladdich and sold it to Pernod Ricard, was it? Yeah, I think so. And Bruichladdich made a whole pile of cash. And not only was he a great marketeer, but he has a passion for what he does. And very good at recruiting the right people to do the right jobs. And he's now opened a distillery, which I really dearly dream of visiting, because I've never been to the Caribbean at all. But he's got a rum distillery in Grenada called the renegade distillery. And what he's trying to do with all of these spirits is introduce a level of detail that maybe have been forgotten before, and talk about terroir, the actual sense of place being important. I was involved in a gin project, which sadly is no longer, but we made really superb gin. And the reason why it was superb gin is because it was called Langton's #1 gin from Lakelands, and it was where I was born, in the Lake District. In fact, very close to where I was born, in a town called Keswick. And on Upper Skidder, one of the tall mountains in the Lake District, we had a borehole, and the water came from there. So when you have a bottle of gin, 60% of the bottle, presuming that 40% of it is alcohol, 60% of it is water that you add. So we felt that was such an important kind of statement of where it was from, that we wanted to have liquid from a place. And if we go to where Mark is with this, after Brooklandy, he created this brand. The packaging is really extraordinary. Waterford, I think when you think Waterford, you think Royal Irish, sort of baronet, Waterford Crystal, that sort of thing. It's from the south, I think from Wexford, somewhere near there. I don't know how far afield the actual sourcing of the drinks are, but what makes this special is that Mark has gone to farm distillers who grow their own barley and make their own distillate, and has come up with drinks which are inherently made identically, but in different places, using the same raw materials, using the same recipe, but coming up with a sense of expression which comes from that place and that place only. And La Cuvée, which is a £70 whiskey, which I think I did on this show about 2 years ago, is a real example of what happens when you have those sort of building blocks with which to Lego together a really great whiskey. They are parts which you can put together, which makes the total whiskey is greater than the individual components. And sometimes there might be an individual component which has so much character, or sits so beautifully and so well balanced, has such a unique and interesting character, that Mark Rainier is inclined, through the Waterford label, to bottle it on its own as a single farm whiskey. And this is not really done before. And it's exciting, and it adds an extra level of interest to the whole whiskey tasting, whiskey curating, collecting story. And bravo to him. He uses Vinilloc glass stoppers, which I think is really elegant and fantastic, which means these beautiful bottles don't get thrown away in my house. I use them for olive oil, for bath salts, God knows what, but they're really beautiful. And what I also like is there's this ribbing at the bottom of the glass. These bottles, I know how expensive making bottles like this is. The dye for a glass foundry, if you want to have your own bottle like this one, would cost anything between 75 and 100,000 euro, 100,000 pounds. So it's a very expensive process. What I love about this is it won't slip out of your hand. It's got a grip, it's got a handle, so you could probably just do that. Maybe not, but anyway, let's try the drink. Because it is Irish. So what separates Irish whiskey from other whiskies? Well, it's a long and complicated story, and a story that's becoming more and more complicated by the second, because now we have a lot of these new pot still Irish whiskies coming out, which are truly magnificent. Given the choice, and I think you might have seen this on the show in the past, if I could drink Redbreast 15-year-old all day, I would. If I could drink Lerville Barton claret finished green spot, I would. These are truly magnificent whiskies, and they're almost a different new category of whiskey. Now, in Ireland, typically, you would distill the whiskey 3 times, which would make the whiskey lighter and more sessionable. That's how Bushmills, that's how Jameson's is made. Let's not forget that it's the Irish that invented whiskey. It wasn't the Scots, and it was brought to Scotland later. But the first licence given to a distillery was given by, I better get this right, I think it was James I, not James II. But we're going back a long way. But Ireland were at it way before the Celts north of the border were doing the thing. So anyway, let's have a look at this. I don't know what the combined age of these whiskies is. I'm imagining this is less than 6 years old, probably between 3 and 5 years old. I could be completely wrong. I don't know how long they've been at it. But this is the little brother of La Cuvée. You can buy the £70 one or 69 quid one. And this one, which is called Cuvée Argot, Argot, which is apparently some patois word. is the kind of little wild child, the cheeky little brother of La Cuvée. And if you read the press brief and the press stuff about this, it was influenced by how Bordeaux wines are put together and the idea of young Bordeaux wines being blended from different parcels. And that inspired this drink. I'm not sure if you can see that in the drink, but this is a terroir-driven whiskey. Strength, 47%. Not pissing around. This is a strong whiskey, as most of these are. Most certainly some very young, I wouldn't say new make, but like just old enough to be whiskies in there. There's a smell of kind of Irish shortbread and meal biscuits, kind of like oat cakes. But on top of that, there's a spreading of a slightly more serious nature. There's more fruit. Behind the cereals, there's some florality, smells of hedgerows. You can smell the wood, you can smell the quality of the oak. It always surprises me how delicious it is, because when you smell it, it smells young and youthful, feisty, a bit precocious, a bit teenagery, like it's looking at you for a fight. And you put it in your mouth, and this wine glides across the palate of wine. Whiskey glides across the palate. Very, very beautiful. The wood's beautifully integrated. It tastes like there's older components in it than it smells like there are. But this is a whole chunk of change cheaper than its big brother. This is £55. I saw it online for 50 quid, certainly, only today. So I think that's, that's a little bit more expensive than you have to pay for serious whiskey these days, but it's a whole lot cheaper than most serious whiskey. And I think the packaging, the story, the innovation, the delicacy and the elegance, if you like really supremely elegant and very detailed whiskies, this is an absolute smash. Mark Rainier, doff my cap to you, sir. It was a great pleasure to meet you at Berry Brothers a few years ago. But wow. Yes. Okay, but 35 quid, okay? And then probably 55. Let's call it 50 if you find the same website as I did. We're now moving on to two howitzer of whiskies. This is a non-designated single malt whiskey from Islay, the famous whiskey island, where the drinks smell like bonfire, smoke, peat, fire and brimstone. And this is a whiskey called Smokehead Unfiltered. It's got this wonderful, crazy little kind of doofer on the front. Now, you can buy this whiskey for around 34 odd quid for the off-license version. But this is a special, I believe, from my friend Johnny. Special, just released, on-trade, limited release version of it, which is the same whiskey, but it's 46%. The other one was 43% and was quite delicious, by the way. But nice to have a full-strength malt whiskey. But this is 46%, giving it just that extra bit of oomph, bit more buttery biscuit base. If Ram Records, if Andy C was to make a malt whiskey, this could be it. Do you like the reference, Johnny? Love it. Okay, so this is unfiltered single malt whiskey. It doesn't have an age designator and it doesn't say where it's from. But here's the thing about Islay. There are a few Islay whiskies out there. You might remember Aerolite Lindsay, which I did about a year and a half ago, or a year, 10 months ago. Aerolite Lindsay was a whiskey which you can now buy. It was £33 or £29.99. It's now 50 quid. It's so desired, so loved that the price has chunked up. And it was a whiskey I absolutely adored drinking. I drank 2 or 3 bottles of it when it was at the £29.95 price point a couple of years ago. Now it's 50 quid. I think it's still worth £50. But there are other ghost Islay whiskies out there, and this is one of them. Another one called Eons Brimstone and Fire or something from Master of Malt. I can't remember. But this is a thing. When distilleries have oversupply, overproduction, maybe there are other reasons for it. Maybe it's a tax thing. But when that whiskey becomes available from some distilleries and they sell it to people who can create brands like this, and Ian MacLeod, who have the wonderful whiskies of Tamdu, which is Tamdu 12-year-old. What a whiskey! What a whiskey! What, the very pure expression of Speyside that whiskey is. But also you've got Glengoyne, which is interesting, different, but really, really stunning. So Ian McLaren are very proud about what they do. They're very proud about the fact they make world-class spirits. And they needed something for their portfolio. So here it comes. They went and bought some whiskey. I imagine that as an independent bottler, they then aged it the way they wished to do so. But when you look at the different malt distilleries on the Isle of Islay, we can all play the silly game of which one's it from. We can rule out some. The small ones like Kilchoman and Michter, too small. Second smallest distillery after Edredale. They sell everything they can make, and it's a very, very good whiskey. And this is eons away in terms of style. You can look at Ardbeg, which is owned by LVMH. They're not selling anything to anyone. They're like Kellogg's now. They look after, they only use the stuff they've got, and very special it is too. Also Bowmore, Morrison Bowmore. I imagine they are in the same sort of boat. There are 2 or 3 other new distilleries that just started up that it definitely can't be from. But then you start looking at the style. Well, let's taste it, because this could be one of the great bargains of Christmas. And you can buy the 43% Smokehead from any of the major online retailers, and they'll be there before Christmas, no doubt at all. What is interesting though is when I pour it, is you'll see the colour. Most of the whiskies I think this could be. Okay, let's play the game. No one knows who it's from. It's not the baby new distilleries. It can't be Port Ellen. They haven't been making whiskey long enough to actually make any new stuff yet. We've already said it's probably not Ardbeg. Stylistically, it's not Ardbeg. It's not Kilchoman. It's not Bowmore. What does that leave us with? We've got things like Lagavulin. That's not Lagavulin. Kind of could be, I suppose. But when you think about the distilleries that actually have very large production, that make a different style of different whiskies, and you think about the kind of peats that these whiskies have, because Islay has different types of. You have some whiskies which smell like of green smoke, of like kind of almost kelp and brine. Bunnahabhain's a very good example of that. And Bunnahabhain does make, or does sell to independent bottlers who make a much smokier version of the natural Bunnahabhain, which is just all brine and no peat. Very different expression, but Bunnahabhain's a beautiful whiskey. I mean, that could be a left-wing choice, but I suspect not. Also, if you look at Lefroy has an elegance and a purity, which it's only when you get to the 15-year-old you start to see real, like, barrel complexity in the whiskey. Even if you've tried the cask strength 8-year-old, which is very pure, it's like drinking cracked pepper and grit and pink peppercorns. It's extraordinary. This is more complex than that, and it feels like it might have been layered through different styles, so different types of whiskey. This kind of peat is not the light smoky peat. This is smoked ham, smoked arborist smokies. It smells of smoked mackerel to me, which I love. Makes my mouth water, which again I suppose Lagavulin did remind me of. But it's not the medicinal smoke that you get from Lefroy, which leaves us with 1 or 2 other places. Pittyvake's no good, so Ardbeg's no good. So let's look at Caol Ila. I think Caol Ila is the one that a lot of people think it might be, and actually having smelt it and tasted it, I think Caol Ila is a very, very strong bet. Caol Ila makes some very fruity whiskies, it makes some real bonfire whiskies, and everything in between. And this smells like a very, very judicious blend of the 2 styles coming together. It's a really, really good whiskey. Thank you very much, Johnny, for saying it to me. I don't usually end up with any peaty whiskey at Christmas because my father-in-law doesn't like it. So, I'm trying to put Die Hard on and drink this. Okay. Definite layer of fruit. Lovely fruit. Almost mango. Bit of sharpness to it as well. Mango and dried strawberry or cranberry. I don't know what age it is. Oh, thanks, Johnny. That was a real Christmas present. Cheered me right up. When you put it in your mouth, I think I need to go again, because that was first impressions. I'm getting pink peppercorns, lavender, smoky, like smoked ham smoke. Oh, like speck from the Alps. It tastes very alpine. It's lovely. I wish I was in the snow drinking this. That'd be perfect. And then they got this glide of mango, sort of fall over the top. So very much easier the second time round. But definitely now I'm getting telecherry peppercorns, like proper top end Indian pepper. Not bay rose, not pink peppercorn anymore, but pepper. Like chili pepper in the mouth now. What a drink! Okay, so this is the limited release on-trade version. Guys out there, if you want to have a really, really great malt whiskey, and I imagine this is incredibly mixable as well. This is, oh, God, that's really, God, it's amazing. It's like a drug. It's just fired me up. Give me some real skip in my step. But also looking at the colour. Looking at that colour and thinking this whiskey can't be more than 6 years old, I don't think. Probably 6. It's definitely older than 3, but... there's a wonderful kind of underlying sweetness. I don't know if that's a few PX casks which have been cleverly added to that, which gives it a slight sweetness, or maybe, but it's more than bourbon. There's some sherry in there, some spice. Right through the middle. What we've got? Oh, there's hot cinnamon as well. Wow, what a whiskey. If these were the same price, which they kind of usually are, no, this is usually £10 more expensive. If you're not interested in the style of whiskey, you just want something exciting, then this really performs incredibly well. The fact this is now £35 a bottle, you really have to get out there and grab it with both hands while you can. Again, thanks, Johnny. Thank you very much, Johnny, and thank you, Alexandra. Thank you, Johnny. We're now coming on to a whiskey which I have had on my shelf for a few days now. And I've been dying to do this show because I wanted to tell people about it. This is rare stuff. If you, a very dear friend of mine, Terry Brown, who I met on a cruise ship when I was hosting these wine trips, and Terry and his lovely wife Susan, they looked after my wife and I at one of my favourite bistros in St James's in London not that long ago. He loves to travel, very cultured man, loves his wine. I think he's from, if I remember, was it Lubbock, Texas or something? Ex-cop, former security. I can't remember the whole story, but Terry was a sweet man, and he turns up with this Santa sack full of Tennessee whiskies and bourbons and God knows what. Garrison Brothers, you know who you are, had a hip flask, this crazy Texan whiskey. But he brought all sorts of wonderful. George Dickel, 15-year-old. I mean, that's like a $60 wine, whiskey in America. I think you're probably looking at about 65 quid here. But a bargain, a 15-year-old straight Tennessee whiskey. Then he brought me some Whistle Pig 10-year-old. I mean, the thing was, it was a very generous present. And then bought us a lovely dinner on top of it. And I palmed him off on a very nice bottle of Pauillac, which you probably can't drink for 10 years. But it's, you can actually. But I definitely won in that relationship. Okay, so here we have this beautiful bottle. People must have heard, if you like whiskey, and you certainly like American whiskey, this is a name which should be familiar to you. Like Whistle Pig is kind of a paradigm of straight rye whiskies. This is a specialist whiskey producer, which is always expensive, never cheap, but I think always delivers, always nails it. They have a female cellar master, the first female cellar master in America since the Prohibition. Well, that's a flipping start. Let's see if we can get a black female one next time. Huh? Okay, but amazing, okay? And this is Michter's. Michter's is the great, for me, smart, I'm showing off whiskey these days. Every whiskey, every trope, every region, every style of drink has its drink that you think, oh, it's a bit of a rip-off. Like, I don't know, Patron Platinum Extra. Patron, it's outgrown its category, and it's too expensive for what it is. The price people will pay for the Macallan and Space Size is laughable, but congratulations to Macallan and the whole of Edrington group for creating this messianic mystique around this drink that people would pay tens of thousands of dollars for bottles of whiskey. And I think in American whiskey terms, I think Blanton would be the one. I think as much as Blanton's delicious, it's just not worth the money that most people will be prepared to pay for it. Michter's, on the other hand. Now, look, I'm not mucking around. This isn't cheap. But this is, they didn't make one last year. This is Michter's 10-year-old single barrel Kentucky straight rye. It's a bourbon, but it's made in Kentucky, which means it's gone through the Lincoln County process, which means this whiskey has been selected by Michter's. They don't make whiskey. They are, in Scottish terms, an independent bottler, not a distiller. They bring the whiskies in and then they age them and then they blend them. It's what Cathedral City does with cheddar. They buy cheddar in, they grade it, and then they sell it as their own. But that's a really, really harsh description and a harsh comparison. Much more like independent bottlers. They're like Gordon and MacPhail or something in Scotland. They buy the whiskies when they're new makes and they're young, and then they treat them the way they think those whiskies should be treated, and then put them together when they think the time is right. And last year, apparently the time wasn't right. This is 47.2% alcohol. And although it says it's a 10-year-old whiskey on the mash bill, they've been waiting for this whiskey to reach a certain age before they said, if we keep it another year or two, it'll be something special. And it's probably a 15 to 17-year-old malt whiskey, which explains the sticker price of £180. Yes, this is not much change out of a bottle out of 200 quid. This is a very, very expensive whiskey, and I love it. I hug it at nights. It looks beautiful. But this is a whiskey which has got a very high corn proportion in it. Michter's make a whole bunch of whiskies which you can buy for around £50 or £60 in the UK, because it's not as well known as it is in America. In America, if you go into a shop and they see this on the shelf, they go, gee, goddamn, 10-year-old Kentucky straight bourbon. I'll buy two, $185 each. So it's $185, it's £180 here. The moment that happens, they just double, if they get any stock, because they know that it will sell out so quickly, because these batches are made in such small quantities, it will sell on the secondary market or even on the first market in an independent whiskey seller at $300, because they know they can get it for that. The Americans will go, I'll pay what I have to pay to get this whiskey. So am I tasting this thinking it's a $300 whiskey, or am I tasting this thinking it's a £180 whiskey? Either way, it's out of my everyday league. But if I had a desert island whiskey, this is the best American whiskey I've ever tasted. Okay, let's have a look at this and see what's special about it. First of all, the proof. It's just above 94 proof, isn't it? Something like that. No, yeah, just above 94 proof, which is important. For some people, that is a cut-off line. It was clearly bottled at 47.2 for a reason. And the distillery for Michter's is in Rick House, is in Louisville, Kentucky, like the other great distilleries. They started off in 1753, and the owners had two sons, Michael and Peter. Put the names together, Michter or Michter. Maybe we should pronounce it Michter, because it was Michael and Peter. Nobody's ever said that to me in the United States. Anyway, the whiskey inside is a minimum of 10 years old, and just by smelling it, I do love American whiskey when it's this good. Very rarely get a chance to try stuff like this. It's like walking into a summer rose garden. Roses, not so much, but look, chrysanthemums, and there's vegetal notes, but it's like the whole garden. It's like walking into Savile Gardens or something. Wrigley Garden, I don't know. Wow. Spicy, complex. Hints of dried burnt orange on the nose. Power. When you put it in your mouth, for the first half a second, it's like you missed your mouth. There's nothing there. It's just this ephemeral cloud. And then it builds. And somebody's beautifully put this together so that it focuses to an end point. Starts off out here, and the flavours congeal and concentrate. I've got a taste of all sorts of Christmas spices. Star anise, nutmeg, cinnamon, duck, spicy egg, like eggnog egg. There's all this florality going, this weird sense of summer freshness as well. There's a freshness to it. Dude, that's what American whiskey tastes like. They actually have a drink called Michter's American Whiskey. Because bourbon has to be aged in new bourbon, new white oak, they're not allowed to make it in used wood barrels like the Scots are so good at. So if you buy Michter's #1 American blend or American whiskey, that's the sweet spot in terms of bargain. Whiskey's, I think, probably 8 or 9 years old, and it's absolutely delicious and probably costs about £65 or so. If you're trying to find something for someone very special, let's just say it's their 70th birthday, their 50th birthday, whatever. If you're trying to propose to someone and you know they like bourbon, this is Kentucky straight whiskey. So it's gone through the Lincolnshire process, a very special filtration process using sugar maple, where they soften off all the hard edges, the hard esters, and you end up with this. And this is, by a mile, the best American whiskey I've ever tasted. I've tasted Scottish whiskies that tasted that good, but normally in the £400 or £500 a bottle mark. This is £180. While it's available, I suggest you go and get it because it won't be around for long. See you next time.